What happens when the lowest of the pack is left to freeze in the winter woods, but instead becomes the mother to every forgotten child? They called her a cursed Omega, but when the ruthless Alpha King came hunting for his lost heir, he didn't find a monster, he found a miracle. The cobblestones of the Dunwich Pack courtyard were slick with freezing rain the night Genevieve's soul was torn in two. In the brutal medieval hierarchy of the Northern Territories, an Omega was little more than a servant, a punching bag for the frustrations of the stronger wolves. But Genevieve had harbored a secret hope. The moon goddess had paired her with Gideon, the future alpha of the Dunwich. She thought the fated mate bond would be her salvation. She was horribly, tragically wrong. I, Gideon of House Dunwich, reject you, Genevieve, as my mate, my Luna, and my equal, his voice boomed, echoing off the high stone walls of the keep. The entire pack had gathered, their eyes gleaming in the torchlight, hungry for the spectacle. Genevieve collapsed, clutching her chest. The breaking of a fated bond felt like physical dismemberment. Her wolf whimpered, curling into a ball in the darkest corners of her mind, preparing to die. "You are weak," Gideon sneered, stepping over her trembling form. He wrapped a heavy, fur-lined arm around a high-ranking warrior female. "My bloodline requires strength. A king cannot be bred from the womb of a runt. By the ancient laws of the territory, an Omega who fails to serve the pack is dead weight. You are exiled to the Ashen Vale." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The Ashen Vale was a sprawling, ancient forest bordering the Dunwich lands. It was a place of perpetual twilight, jagged ravines, and feral predators. Exile. There wasn't a punishment. It was an execution. Stripped of her warm cloak, clad only in a tattered linen dress, Genevieve was forced out of the iron gates. As the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, the finality of her doom settled in. She walked blindly into the howling blizzard, her bare feet bleeding against the frost-heaved earth. She walked until her tears froze to her cheeks, until the searing pain in her chest dulled into a numb, hollow ache. She intended to lay down beneath the gnarled roots of a dying oak and let the cold take her. But fate, it seemed, was not finished with the rejected Omega. As the morning sun broke weakly through the dense canopy, casting a pale, grayish light over the snow, Genevieve stumbled upon ruins. It was an ancient stone structure, St. Jude's Abbey, a forgotten relic from centuries past before the wolves had organized into strict pack territories. The roof was partially caved in, but the thick stone walls remained intact, offering a barrier against the wind. She crawled inside, intending it to be her tomb, but as she curled against the altar stone, a sound broke the absolute silence of the ruins. A whimper. Genevieve froze. Her dull senses suddenly sparked to life. She dragged herself toward the sound, digging furiously into a pile of snow and rotting timber near the collapsed choir stalls. There, shivering uncontrollably and on the brink of death, was a pup. He couldn't have been more than 3 years old in human terms. He was stuck in his shifted form, a tiny, mottled brown wolf pup. But as Genevieve pulled him to her chest, wrapping her meager body heat around him, she saw why he was here. His left front paw was twisted, mangled from birth. In the ruthless packs of the medieval wild, a deformed pup was a liability. He had been carried out into the woods and left for the winter to claim. Something primal, ancient, and blindingly powerful snapped awake inside Genevieve. The despair that had been suffocating her evaporated, replaced by a roaring, protective fire. Her inner wolf, which had laid down to die hours ago, stood up, bared its teeth, and howled in the silence of her mind. "I've got you," Genevieve whispered, her voice cracking as she pressed her cheek to the pup's freezing fur. "I've got you, little one. We are not dying today." That day, Genevieve did not just survive. She was reborn. She used her bare hands to dig out dry moss and brittle wood. She used the friction of 2 stones and her desperate bloody fingers to spark a fire in the abbey's ancient hearth. She caught a sickly rabbit using a snare made from the hem of her own dress. She named the pup Toby. He was the first, but he would by no means be the last. 3 brutal winters passed. In the territories beyond the Ashen Veil, the political landscape was shifting violently. The Alpha King, Leander of the High Reaches, was waging a bloody campaign to unify the fractured packs under one crown. It was an era of war, strict obedience, and ruthless efficiency. In this militaristic society, any weakness was purged. Pups born deaf, blind, undersized, or simply deemed unfit by cruel pack alphas were quietly disposed of in the deep woods. But a strange rumor began to circulate among the lowest castes of the werewolf society. It started as a whisper in the servant kitchens and the Omega quarters, the ghost mother of the Veil. They said that if a lost pup could run fast enough, if a discarded runt could drag themselves deep enough into the cursed woods, they would find safety. They said, a spirit of the forest, a massive phantom wolf with eyes like warm amber, would emerge from the shadows and spirit the children away to a hidden paradise. The ghost mother was no spirit, it was Genevieve. The ruined St. Jude's Abbey was no longer a tomb, it was a fortress of life. The gaps in the stone walls had been painstakingly patched with packed earth, woven branches, and thick moss. The hearth fire never went out. Animal pelts lined the floor, and the rafters were hung with dried meats and medicinal herbs. Genevieve sat by the fire, mending a small tunic with a bone needle. Surrounding her were 14 pups. 14 rejected, discarded, and broken children. There was Toby, now a sturdy 6-year-old whose twisted paw never slowed him down. He had learned to run with a unique galloping gait. There was Clara, a mute girl from the Iron Fang pack, who communicated entirely through the twitch of her ears and the expressions on her face. There were twins, born blind, who could navigate the forest better than any fully sighted hunter by relying on the vibrations in the earth. Genevieve had changed. The fragile, cowering Omega who had been exiled from Dunwich was gone. In her place sat a hardened matriarch. Her hair was braided back with strips of leather, her arms were scarred from fighting off feral bears and rogue wolves, and her posture was straight and commanding. Yet, when she looked at the pups, her eyes held an ocean of warmth. "You are not broken," she would tell them every night, gathering them close. "The packs who threw you away are blind. You are the wild, and the wild survives." But Genevieve's hidden sanctuary was entirely dependent on secrecy. She meticulously buried their scents, taught the pups to move without snapping a single twig, and never hunted in the same area twice. She knew that if the alphas discovered she was hoarding their discards, they would see it as a monstrous insult to their laws. They would come to slaughter them all. And the greatest threat of all was King Leander. Leander was known as the Iron King. He ruled with absolute, terrifying logic. He believed in strength above all. He was currently traveling through the northern territories, enforcing his laws and collecting taxes from the vassal packs, including Gideon's Dunwich pack. Leander's royal caravan was a moving fortress, but it possessed one terrifying vulnerability: his nephew, Henry. Henry was the only son of Leander's late brother, who had died in battle defending the king. At just 6 years old, Henry was the sole heir to the throne of the High Reaches. He was the apple of the ruthless king's eye, the only creature on earth who could make the Iron King smile. Disaster struck precisely at dusk on the border of the Ashen Veil. A coalition of rebel rogues, desperate to end Leander's conquering reign, ambushed the royal caravan in a narrow mountain pass. The attack was sudden and deafening. Flaming arrows rained down from the cliffs. Massive, shifted wolves clashed in the mud, tearing at throats and armor. "Protect the prince!" Leander roared, shifting into his massive, pitch-black Lycan form, a terrifying beast, standing nearly 8 feet tall on his hind legs. He tore through the rebel lines, a whirlwind of claws and blood. But in the chaos, a burning wagon overturned, separating little Henry from the royal guards. Terrified by the fire, the screaming, and the sheer scent of blood, the young royal pup panicked. He shifted into his small, silver-furred wolf form and bolted. He didn't run toward the safety of the rear guard. Blinded by panic, he scrambled down the rocky embankment and plunged straight into the dark, forbidding tree line of the Ashen Vale. By the time Leander had slaughtered the last of the rebels and shifted back, covered in the blood of his enemies, the horrifying reality set in. "Where is the boy?" Leander demanded, his chest heaving, his golden eyes scanning the burning wreckage. The captain of the guard fell to his knees, trembling violently. "My king, his scent, it leads down into the vale." Leander's heart stopped. The Ashen Vale was notoriously lethal. It was crawling with feral predators, deep ravines, and freezing temperatures. A lone pup, even a royal one, wouldn't last the night. "Summon the Dunwich pack," Leander snarled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, lethal desperation. "Tell Alpha Gideon to bring every tracker he has. If my nephew perishes in those woods, I will burn this entire territory to the ash it's named for." Without waiting for his guards, the Alpha King leaped down the embankment, shifting back into his massive black beast, and disappeared into the shadows of the cursed forest, hunting for the scent of his blood. For 2 days and 2 nights, King Leander did not sleep, did not eat, and barely paused for breath. The Ashen Vale lived up to its deadly reputation. The king fought off a pack of rabid scavengers, nearly lost his footing in a hidden glacial ravine, and endured a blinding snow squall that threatened to erase the faint, terrified scent of his nephew. But as the dawn of the 3rd day broke, the scent profile changed. Leander, still in his massive wolf form, paused, his nose twitching. The metallic tang of fear and exhaustion that had characterized Henry's trail suddenly vanished. It was replaced by something entirely different: wood smoke, roasted meat, and a scent that made the Alpha King's massive heart stutter in his chest. It was a scent of ancient pine, sweet rain, and an overwhelming, intoxicating aura of peace. It was a scent that commanded the very beast beneath his skin to drop its hackles and submit. Leander shifted back to his human form, hastily pulling on the spare breeches strapped to his survival pack. He drew his broadsword, stepping silently through the dense thicket of frosted evergreens. He expected to find a den of ruthless rogues who had kidnapped his heir for ransom. He expected a slaughter. Instead, he parted the heavy branches of a willow tree and stepped into the clearing of the ruined St. Jude's Abbey. Leander froze, his breath catching in his throat. In the center of the courtyard, bathed in the soft morning light, was a woman. She was clad in stitched leathers and thick furs, a heavy bow slung across her back. But it wasn't the weapons that held the king captive, it was the sheer, magnetic power radiating from her. And there, sitting in her lap, wrapped securely in a thick bear pelt, and drinking warm broth from a wooden bowl, was Prince Henry. Henry wasn't tied up. He wasn't crying. The royal pup, who usually scoffed at strangers, was leaning comfortably against the woman's chest, looking up at her with absolute adoration. Around them, a dozen other pups were engaged in chores. A boy with a twisted paw was carrying firewood. A mute girl was plucking a pheasant. It was a well-oiled, peaceful pack of misfits. Leander stepped out of the shadows, an imposing figure of scarred muscle and royal authority. He accidentally snapped a dry branch under his heavy boot. Instantly, the peaceful scene shattered. Genevieve's head snapped toward him. In a blur of motion, she dropped the bowl, swept Henry behind her legs, and drew her bow. An arrow was nocked and aimed dead at Leander's left eye before he could even raise his sword. Every single pup in the courtyard immediately scrambled behind the ruined stone pillars, hiding seamlessly. "Take one more step, intruder, and I will pin your eye to the back of your skull," Genevieve warned. Her voice wasn't the trembling squeak of an omega. It was low, resonant, and thrumming with a primal vibration that made the ground beneath Leander's boots seem to hum. Leander stared at her, completely captivated. His inner wolf, the apex predator of the continent, was absolutely frantic, pacing in his mind, whining not in fear, but in profound, instinctual reverence. "She is not an omega," his wolf roared in his mind. "Look at her. Feel her aura." Leander slowly, deliberately, lowered his sword and dropped it into the snow. He raised his bare hands to show he was unarmed. "I am King Leander of the High Reaches," he said, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "And the pup hiding behind your knees is my nephew, Henry. I have come to take him home." Genevieve's eyes narrowed, the bowstring remaining taut against her cheek. She glanced down at Henry. "Is this man your uncle, little one?" Henry peeked out from behind Genevieve's leather-clad legs. His eyes lit up. "Uncle Leo!" he cheered. But surprisingly, he didn't run to the king. He stayed firmly holding on to Genevieve's leg. "He's my uncle, Jen. He's the loud one." Genevieve exhaled a sharp breath, slowly lowering her bow, though she didn't put the arrow away. "Your pup is safe, Your Majesty. He stumbled into my wards yesterday evening, half frozen and exhausted. You may take him, but then you must leave. This sanctuary is not for the eyes of alphas." Leander took a slow step forward, his golden eyes locked onto Genevieve. His highly trained senses were piecing the puzzle together. The discarded pups, the overwhelming feeling of peace, the way the very forest seemed to bend around her to hide this place. He remembered old scrolls in the royal archives, texts burned by paranoid kings centuries ago. They spoke of the anima, the true lunas. They were a rare classification of female wolves, thought to be entirely extinct. They weren't warriors, but they possessed a maternal magic so potent it could heal the sick, command the obedience of any wolf without force, and birth the strongest alpha kings the world had ever seen. The text said an anima's power only awakened through intense trauma or the desperate need to protect the helpless. The packs called them omegas out of ignorance, suppressing their power because they didn't understand it. "Who are you?" Leander asked, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "A lone female, surviving in the Vale, harboring the cast-offs of my kingdom. I am Genevieve," she said coldly. "And they are not cast-offs. They are mine." Before Leander could respond, before he could tell her what she truly was, a chilling sound shattered the morning air. Horns, deep, brazen war horns echoing through the trees, closing in from the south. Genevieve's face went pale. The pups whimpered from their hiding spots. Leander cursed violently, spinning around. He had ordered Gideon and the Dunwich pack to track his path. They had followed the king's brutal trail straight through the Vale, right to the hidden sanctuary. Through the trees, the massive forms of 50 heavily armored Dunwich warriors emerged, led by none other than Alpha Gideon. Gideon's eyes scanned the clearing, widening as they landed on the king, the royal pup, and then Gideon's jaw dropped in sheer disbelief as he recognized the woman standing defiantly in the center of it all. "Genevieve," Gideon sneered, a cruel, ugly smile spreading across his face as he stepped into the courtyard, drawing his weapon. Well, the pathetic little Omega didn't die after all. And she's kidnapped the king's heir. Gideon looked to Leander, bowing his head in a mock display of loyalty. "My king, you found her. Step aside. Allow me to execute this rogue trash for stealing your blood, and we will escort you home." Genevieve didn't cower. She didn't retreat. She simply raised her bow again, aiming it straight at the man who had broken her soul 3 years ago. Leander looked from the smirking, arrogant Gideon to the fierce, magnificent woman standing her ground to protect the broken children of his kingdom. The Iron King felt a slow, terrifying, and utterly lethal rage boil up in his blood. The king didn't step aside. Instead, Leander turned his back on Genevieve, planting his boots firmly in front of her and the pups, and casually picked his broadsword back up from the snow. "Gideon," King Leander said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating a killing intent so thick it made the air heavy. "If you take one more step toward my queen, I will rip your spine from your throat." The word hung in the freezing air of the courtyard, heavy and absolute. Queen. Gideon stared at the massive, battle-scarred Alpha King, a nervous, mocking laugh bubbling up in his throat. He looked back at his 50 heavily armed Dunwich warriors, seeking validation, before turning his sneer back to Leander. "My king, The frost of the veil has clearly addled your mind, Gideon said, though he took a cautious half-step backward, intimidated by the sheer, crushing pressure of Leander's aura. That creature behind you is no queen. That is Genevieve. She was a pathetic, cowering omega of my pack, a runt who couldn't even hunt properly. I rejected her myself 3 winters ago and banished her to die. Whatever parlor trick she has played to enchant you— You rejected her? Leander interrupted, his voice deathly quiet. The king didn't shout. He didn't need to. The low, vibrating frequency of his Lycan growl made the ancient stones of St. Jude's Abbey rattle. Leander's golden eyes flicked over his shoulder, catching Genevieve's gaze. He saw the old, deep-seated pain in her eyes, the scars on her arms that she had earned surviving the death sentence this arrogant fool had handed her. He looked at the pups, the broken children who were now trembling behind the pillars, children who had been discarded under laws enforced by alphas, exactly like Gideon. Leander turned his full, terrifying attention back to the alpha of Dunwich. "You are a blind, ignorant whelp, Gideon," Leander snarled, stepping forward. His broadsword caught the morning light, gleaming with a deadly promise. "You possessed a jewel of the goddess, a creature of such profound, ancient power that my ancestors would have waged century-long wars to protect her. And you threw her in the snow because you were too weak to comprehend her." Gideon's face flushed dark red with humiliation and fury. "She is an omega. Pack law dictates." "She is an anima!" Leander's roar shattered the morning calm, sending a flock of ravens bursting from the canopy above. The Dunwich warriors gasped, shuffling nervously. Even the most uneducated wolf knew the old nursery rhymes of the anima, the true lunas, the mothers of magic, the sovereign souls of the forest. They were myths, legends meant to comfort children in the dark. "It is a lie," Gideon spat, drawing his own jagged longsword. The embarrassment of being dressed down in front of his men, combined with the sudden, terrifying realization that he might have committed the greatest blunder in werewolf history, pushed him into madness. "The king is bewitched. She is a rogue witch, and she has infected his mind. Men of Dunwich, the king is compromised. Execute the witch and secure the prince." It was treason. High, unforgivable treason. A dozen of Gideon's most loyal guards hesitated for only a second before surging forward, their weapons drawn, their eyes locked on Genevieve. They expected the king to fall back. They expected the Omega to scream. They were catastrophically wrong on both counts. Leander moved with the explosive, brutal speed of an apex predator. He didn't bother to shift into his wolf form. His Lycan strength bled into his human muscles. He swung his broadsword in a devastating horizontal arc, instantly disarming the first 3 warriors and sending them crashing into the snow with shattered ribs. But Leander was not fighting alone. Genevieve did not cower behind her king. She was the ghost mother of the Vale, the protector of the innocent, and this was her sanctuary. As a massive Dunwich warrior tried to flank Leander, lunging toward the pillar where little Prince Henry was hiding, a sharp thwack echoed through the courtyard. An arrow, fletched with raven feathers, buried itself deep into the warrior's shoulder, pinning him to the wooden heavy door of the abbey. Genevieve stood tall atop the ruined altar, her bow drawn again in a blur of motion. Her eyes glowed with a fierce, ethereal, amber light. The very air around her seemed to shimmer, the ancient magic of the anima answering her call to protect her pack. "Toby! The deadfall!" Genevieve shouted. From the rafters above, the young boy with the twisted paw pulled a heavy, braided vine. A massive net of weighted stones and spiked logs, a trap Genevieve had spent weeks building for rogue bear attacks, crashed down from the ceiling, instantly pinning 5 advancing warriors to the earth. The blind ones, now. The twin pups, sightless but profoundly connected to the vibrations of the earth, scurried along the outer walls, kicking away the wooden chocks that held back barrels of rendered animal fat and ash. The slippery mixture flooded the stone steps, sending heavily armored attackers slipping and crashing down in a chaotic heap. Gideon, Realizing his men were being dismantled by a single man and a handful of crippled pups, let out a howl of pure, unadulterated rage. He shifted mid-stride, his bones cracking and reforming into a massive, muddy brown wolf. He ignored the king entirely, leaping over the fallen barrels and lunging straight for Genevieve. His jaws snapped open, aiming to tear the throat from the woman who had humiliated him. He never even made it close. Leander intercepted him mid-air. The king threw his broadsword aside and met the beast with his bare hands. Leander's hands clamped around Gideon's furry throat, slamming the massive brown wolf into the stone floor with such force that a spiderweb of cracks erupted across the courtyard. "You dare bare your fangs at my queen?" Leander whispered, his voice entirely devoid of humanity. Leander's own shift was instantaneous and terrifying. The human king vanished, replaced by an 8-foot-tall, pitch-black Lycan monster. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his alpha aura slammed down on the courtyard like a physical weight. Every single Dunwich warrior still standing immediately collapsed to their knees, their inner wolves whining in absolute, terrifying submission. Leander placed one massive, clawed foot on Gideon's chest, pinning the struggling alpha to the ground. "I, Leander, king of the high reaches, find you guilty of high treason, the attempted murder of the royal heir, and the desecration of an anima," Leander's voice boomed, echoing with the ancient authority of the first wolves. "I strip you of your rank, I strip you of your pack, and I strip you of your life." With a sickening crunch that echoed off the stone walls, the reign of Alpha Gideon ended. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by the crackling of the hearth fire and the heavy, ragged breathing of the Dunwich warriors kneeling in the snow. They kept their heads pressed firmly to the dirt, offering their throats in surrender to the Iron King. Leander slowly shifted back to his human form. He didn't look at the trembling men. Instead, he turned his gaze upward, toward the altar. Genevieve still had an arrow nocked, her hands trembling slightly, her chest heaving as the adrenaline of the battle began to ebb. She looked at the broken body of the man who had once been her fated mate, the man who had sentenced her to die. She felt no sorrow, only a profound, cleansing relief. Slowly, she lowered her bow. Leander walked toward her. He didn't march with the arrogance of a conqueror. He walked with the slow, careful steps of a man approaching a deity. When he reached the base of the altar, the most feared king in the history of the Northern Territories did something no one had ever seen him do. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "The threat is gone, Genevieve," Leander said softly, his golden eyes looking up at her with a mixture of awe and absolute devotion. "No one will ever harm you, or your children, again. You have my word. You have my life." Prince Henry peeked out from behind a stone pillar, saw the danger was over, and ran across the courtyard. But he didn't run to his uncle. He ran to Genevieve, wrapping his small arms tightly around her waist. Genevieve dropped her bow, her tough exterior finally cracking as she fell to her knees and hugged the royal pup, burying her face in his silver hair. For the first time in 3 years, the ghost mother of the Vale wept. The aftermath of the skirmish brought a fundamental shift to the Northern Territories. The surviving Dunwich warriors were ordered back to their territory with a royal decree. Their lands were now under direct martial control of the crown. And any pack member who spoke ill of the new queen would share Gideon's fate. But in the heart of St. Jude's Abbey, a different kind of revolution was taking place. That evening, the courtyard was cleared of the debris of battle. The pups, realizing that the terrifying giant man who had killed the bad wolves was actually Henry's uncle, slowly began to emerge from their shells. Toby was currently showing Leander how his twisted paw allowed him to grip the bark of pine trees better than a straight paw, making him an excellent climber. Leander listened to the boy with genuine fascination, praising his ingenuity. Genevieve watched from the hearth, a cup of hot chamomile tea warming her scarred hands. "He is good with them," a soft voice signed. Genevieve looked down at Clara, the mute girl, who was communicating through a series of quick hand gestures Genevieve had invented for her. "He is. Surprising," Genevieve signed back, her eyes lingering on the broad, muscular back of the king. Later that night, after the pups were tucked into their thick fur beds, Leander approached Genevieve. The air between them hummed with a strange, magnetic tension. It wasn't just the gratitude of a king for the savior of his heir. It was a profound, soul-deep pull. "I meant what I called you," Leander said quietly, taking a seat on a stone bench opposite her. The firelight danced across the sharp planes of his face. "Queen. Anima. You are the heart the High Reaches has been missing." Genevieve looked down at her hands. "I am a banished Omega, Leander. My own fated mate rejected me. I am broken goods in the eyes of your society. I cannot sit on a throne of gold when my soul belongs to the dirt and the trees. Your mate was a fool who couldn't see the sun if it blinded him," Leander stated, leaning forward, his golden eyes intensely focused on hers. "The moon goddess pairs us. Yes, but she also gives us free will. Gideon used his to discard a miracle. In doing so, he severed the bond. You are free." Leander reached out, his large, calloused hand gently covering hers. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of pure, crackling electricity shot up Genevieve's arm. Her inner wolf, which had been wary and protective, suddenly purred, pressing against the forefront of her mind, with overwhelming joy. "Mate," her wolf whispered. "The true mate." Leander gasped softly, his eyes widening as he felt it too. The fated bond wasn't a myth, and it hadn't been destroyed. It had simply been waiting for the right soul to claim it. "You belong to the dirt and the trees," Leander murmured, a soft, rare smile breaking across his hardened features. "Then I will not drag you to a castle of cold stone. We will build our court here, in the Vale, where the wild things are safe." And the Iron King kept his promise. Over the next 5 years, the Ashen Vale transformed. It was no longer a cursed forest of exile. Massive stone walls were erected, weaving seamlessly through the ancient oak trees, creating a sprawling, heavily fortified sanctuary city named Havenwood. The cruel laws of the old pacts were incinerated. Leander and Genevieve issued the Edict of the Anima. No pup, regardless of physical ailment, shifting delay, or rank, shall be abandoned. Any pack found practicing the exile of Omegas or Runts will face the immediate wrath of the crown. Havenwood stands as an open sanctuary. All who seek refuge will find it. The kingdom flourished under the dual rule of the Iron King's unyielding strength and the true Luna's boundless compassion. The broken pups that Genevieve had saved from the snow did not remain helpless. Raised under the tutelage of the king's elite guards and nurtured by the Anima's magic, they became the most formidable generation the High Reaches had ever seen. Toby, the boy with the twisted paw, grew into a brilliant military strategist. His unique way of navigating the terrain allowed him to design ambush tactics that no traditional wolf could counter. He became the youngest general of the royal vanguard. Clara, the mute girl, whose silence had once been deemed a weakness, became the king's master of whispers. Her ability to read body language, lip-read from 100 yards away, and move completely silently made her the greatest spy master in the realm. The blind twins became the kingdom's premier trackers, able to sense rogue movements miles away through the vibrations of the bedrock. And Prince Henry, the royal heir, grew up not as an arrogant prince in an ivory tower, but as a brother to the wild outcasts, deeply, deeply empathetic and fiercely protective of the vulnerable. Genevieve never wore a golden crown. Instead, she wore a woven circlet of winter roses and pine branches. She still walked barefoot in the soft moss of the forest, and her hands were still stained with medicinal herbs. One crisp winter morning, Genevieve stood on the balcony of their timber-framed palace, looking out over the bustling courtyard of Havenwood. Dozens of pups of all shapes, sizes, and abilities were laughing, training, and playing in the snow. Leander stepped up behind her, wrapping his thick arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He pressed a warm kiss to the crown of her head. "They are thriving," Leander rumbled, his voice filled with pride. "They are," Genevieve smiled, leaning into his strength. She placed her hand over his, resting them both against the slight new swell of her stomach, the first royal pup born of an anima in centuries. "Because they know they are loved. We took the broken pieces of your kingdom, my king, and we built a fortress." Leander turned her in his arms, looking deeply into the amber eyes of the woman who had brought light to his bloody reign. "No, my queen," Leander whispered, his golden eyes filled with an endless, consuming devotion. "You were the fortress all along. I just finally found my way home." The rejected Omega didn't just survive the winter. She became the mother of a new world, proving that true strength isn't measured by the sharpness of a wolf's fangs, but by the size of the heart that guides them. Did Genevieve's journey from a rejected, heartbroken outcast to the most powerful queen of the high reaches leave you breathless? The wild always survives, and so does true love. If you want more thrilling werewolf lore, dramatic fated mate twists, and epic medieval romance stories just like this one, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this tale with your pack, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive audio stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss a howl.